There we go. Hello, welcome to the True Paranormal. Today we will be discussing my latest blog post, which is going to be about how legitimate of a team Most Haunted are. This is going to be the last post that I do, and the last video I do about Most Haunted for a while, because I've done a lot of Most Haunted. The end of last year I covered their Return to Pendle Hill video, and then they did the 5-part Halloween special investigation, where they went back to Pendle Hill and investigated the Gisborne estate, which is kind of near to Pendle Hill. Big manor house with some farm cottage type things around it. And the Witch's Cottage, which was part of the Return to Pendle Hill investigation, was part of that investigation. But they investigated first as a separate video and then went back. So there are 6 in total of the Pendle Hill things, but I'm not going to be discussing that first one. Because that is separate from the Halloween stuff. So I'm going to be judging the team entirely off the Halloween investigation. Now, in comparison to the written post I've done, as usual here I will probably end up discussing some stuff I've accidentally missed out of that post, or there I've discussed stuff that I either will forget to mention here or will be unable to mention due to it being statistics and facts that I can't remember off the top of my head. I have written down some notes which I've written up during that post, but it's not much. And that post is a very analytical, kind of essay structured type of written post. At least that's how I tried to do it. I'm aware that the conclusion kind of wanders a little bit more into my own thoughts and speculations, but for the most part I feel like it's mostly analytical in how it is and looking at numbers and whatnot. Here we will look at some of those numbers that I discuss in that post, as well as looking into the more, just more of what happens and how people respond to it, because that's something I didn't discuss in that post. I want to try and keep that post as subjective as I could, whereas this one is going to discuss more my opinions, how they deal with things, etc. So, the Most Haunted 2023 Halloween investigation. In the blog post, the title, I question whether or not Most Haunted are a legitimate paranormal investigation team, because at the start of their investigations, and I will read out the quote because I have actually written it out, the start of every video they do, they have a title card which says, "The following program is definitely not for entertainment purposes only. We stand by the legitimacy of this investigation." And the word "not" is all in capital letters to definitely put across the message that it's not for entertainment purposes only. Now, when I read that statement, I interpret it as they have a strong emphasis on the not for entertainment only. But the fact that they've included the word only means that they are still a little bit for entertainment, but it's not just for that. Which is why, absolutely, when watching their videos, I will let certain things slide. Certain things like narrative building, for instance, when they're going into a place and they're talking about how spooky it is and how they've got the lights off and they can't see anything, and building the tension. I forgive them for that. That is something that I have no issue with them doing, because it's not for entertainment purposes only. So I have no issue. They've stated that there is still a hint of entertainment in there. Then we stand by the legitimacy. I can't say that word today. We stand by the legitimacy of this investigation. That's the bit which I am going to focus on. The legitimacy of this investigation part, because that implies that they are going to a location to properly investigate the paranormal and to try and do whatever they can to accurately portray a paranormal investigation and to get as legitimate results, like as legitimate as they can. That's their aim, is to be legitimate. So through that to me implies that they're going to be using the scientific method of investigation, which is something I feel a lot of teams don't do. I could be wrong, and I could just be looking at the bigger teams. So first, I'm going to acknowledge my own personal biases and things, to just get that out the way. In terms of myself, I believe in the paranormal. I believe it exists. However, I do not believe that every single thing ever experienced in an abandoned location is a paranormal occurrence. I think that there's natural causes to probably at least 80% of things, I would say. So, do I think Most Haunted are legitimate? I don't know. But we'll discuss that in this video. And also, I was going to make a second point, but I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. Oh yeah, big teams, small teams. My own viewership of teams is not great at all. I do not watch many investigation teams, big or small. I know of Most Haunted. I know of Barry Guy's group with Help My House is Haunted. I'm aware of Danny Robbins with Uncanny. I'm aware of Zach Baggins and Ghost Adventures and things. But how much have I seen of these things? Pretty much none. I've seen a lot of Most Haunted when I was younger. I've seen a bit of Help My House is Haunted, predominantly just the episodes that I've reviewed on here. I've not seen any Ghost Adventures, not seen anything with Zach Baggins in, don't like American stuff. I've seen 28 Days Haunted. That's the only American-based program I've seen. I think I saw an episode of Haunted Collector once, but yeah, I wasn't a fan. I've seen an episode of Uncanny, and aside from that, I've seen obviously Beardo Get Scared on YouTube. Seen that. We'll be discussing that next week. But yeah, as for that, I don't really watch a lot. I've seen the Overnight Channel as well, obviously on YouTube, and some of their investigations. Also, Ghosts of Britain on Facebook. I've seen them as well. So, as for someone watching the paranormal, I've seen mainly bigger teams. I haven't really seen any independent small teams. Part of that is because I have my own thoughts and theories on investigation, and I think by taking the knowledge of what I have of the bigger teams and teams potentially faking things, I can take that and look at that and go, right, what are they not doing well? How can I improve on what they're doing? And then, lead down my own thoughts, theories, type of thing, rather than looking at small teams and going, okay, I'm just doing what they're doing. It's easier to change what is broken than what's not broken, basically. So, with that being said, Most Haunted, pretty much one of the only investigation teams I know. I'm not going to compare them to any other teams because I don't really know any other teams. So I'm just taking what they're showing as investigation and I'm judging off that, and I'm comparing it to the scientific method and what that is. So, the scientific method. Let's discuss what that is. This is where I'm going to go to the notes that I've made on the scientific method, because I can't remember all the steps that I wrote out. I think I wrote out about 7 steps in total in the blog that I wrote, in the post. But a lot of websites online list it as 5 points, but I'm aware some of those points kind of overlap, so I've spread it out a little bit over 7. Here I've written down 5, but a lot of slashes. So the definition is: the scientific method is the standardized process by which scientists gather data to test whether their hypothesis aligns with existing scientific knowledge. Now, a point I'll mention here is obviously the definition of the scientific method includes hypothesis. That is where a lot of the Most Haunted team trip up, because they don't have a hypothesis that I can see, at least. Like I say, in my blog, I write down detailed points on each step of the scientific process and whether or not each member of the team fulfills that at any point in the 5-part investigation video. So the method that I've written down, so you start off with your observation, you're going into questions then, so you observe something, so like, oh, I can hear tapping. Then you go into questions of, oh, I wonder what's causing the tapping. You do some research, so that would be kind of background research on the location, or on hauntings in general, anything like that, which you can take with you into an investigation or an experiment, to try and help you build a hypothesis and things beforehand. So you then create your hypothesis, which is kind of a prediction of what you think is going to happen. But with that, you can't just say, I think this will happen. You can't just say, I think if I say hello, a knock will happen. because that's really vague and not at all. You can't really measure that, and it leaves open chance of fluke and stuff like that. So you go in there, and this is why I like equipment, because you can quantify that a bit more, and why I particularly like Spirit Talker, because you can very much so look at this and go, right, if I'm in this location, I use Spirit Talker, if I use Spirit Talker for an hour, it will definitely say that, it'll say stuff about a child, for instance. So if I'm in the living room, it'll say about a child, but if I'm in the kitchen, it'll say about a woman. I don't know, but and then you can run that, you can test that, and be like, oh yeah, there we go, I've predicted it. But you need to have variables to change, because obviously, if you're using Spirit Talker in the living room and it says child, it might just be a fluke. So then you need to change the variable of the location, and you need to go into the kitchen and see if it says child again. If it says child again, then that might mean that it's not specific to the living room, and it's not, I think I'm trying to get the point across. My brain's just gone blank halfway through that. But you need to change your variables, basically. So you can't just say, I think this will happen. You need to say, this thing is dependent on this thing. And you need to then change what the thing is dependent on in order to accurately test it. And that's where Most Haunted kind of trip up a fair bit. I explain it way better in my written things than this waffle that I'm doing. But yeah, and then you take your hypothesis and you do an experiment, which is a way of gathering data. And that is, in the paranormal sense, it is the good example, doors, I've just thought of. So, observation, you observe that a door has slammed. Question, why is the door slammed? Research the location, have any doors slammed for other people? Hypothesis, the door in the living room will slam if you'd have to say, like, if I ask the spirit to close the door. Something like that, if they've got trends of that happening. Or if I dress in a particular period outfit, if you wanted to test out Singapore theory. And then you'd go into experiment where you dress that particular way, or you call out to the spirits to slam that particular door, and then either it will happen or it won't happen, and that's your data then. You have tested that thing. And if it slams, fantastic. If it doesn't slam, you kind of have to wonder why. So you experiment, gather data, so that's what that is, and then you collect the data, which again, gathering data, and you analyse it. So you'd be like, right, out of X amount of times I asked for a spirit to close that particular door, how many times did the door close? It's like if you're using Spirit Talker, out of X amount of times for me to say, what's your name, how many times did it give a direct response, no words in between, of it then saying a name? And you analyse that, and then you draw your conclusions. So in the case of the door, if it slammed, it seems paranormal because you've got it slamming on command. If you've got the name coming through on Spirit Talker, you'd say, right, well, clearly it's paranormal because it is happening time and time again through this experimentation method. Or at least you can rule out things because then you tweak your variables. So then you might be like, right, Spirit Talker, maybe it's a case of it just frequently says names, so I'm fluking it. So then you say, okay, what year were you born? And then you keep on asking that kind of thing to see if it then starts saying years, or you ask how old they are, and then it starts saying ages. So you test that, so you can move to different rooms in the house and be like, right, can you slam this door? And then you'd assess it based on those conclusions. So that's how the scientific method would work regarding the paranormal world. So, do Most Haunted do any of that, is the question. Do certain members of the Most Haunted team use the scientific method through investigation? Specifically, do they use it through the Halloween investigation that they did, through the 5 parts? And the reason why I've decided to have this big discussion over the scientific method and things regarding Most Haunted for this particular event, this video and things, is because the Halloween investigation wasn't just one investigation, it wasn't just one video. They were investigating the Gisborne estate, which covers a variety of locations. So you've got the 5 team members, the 5 investigators there, across this big location, which is made up of, and I will read them off because I did write a list of it, if I can find it. There we go. Location. So you've got hospital wing, psychiatric unit, upper living quarters, you've got farmhouse, you've got cellars, but I'm not going to discuss the cellars, I didn't do that in the written post. And then you've got what they've dubbed as the witch's cottage. So you've got 5 locations there in total for the 5 team members to investigate. So that means that 1 team member per location, right? And because it's 5 videos, everyone can investigate each location at least once, which then gives each investigator locating each building, which means 5 investigations total per building. So it's a lot of investigations to then kind of cross-examine, or at least that's how in theory it would work. They don't do it quite like that. They're a bit sneaky. They avoid that by pairing up occasionally, which is on Yvette. Yvette, during the walk around, kind of has a bit of a fuss over, I don't want to split up. So Yvette is never by herself. Everyone else at one point is by themselves. So Yvette kind of skews a little bit. And in terms of the 5 videos, the first one isn't entirely investigation. You do have just the other 4 which are investigations. That's an important thing to mention. Because the first video is your history, which isn't a lot, and it's your walk around. It doesn't really have investigation because they've got, in a way it is, because they've got the general shots section where stuff spontaneously happened while they were getting general shots, which means they're technically little investigation segments, and I have included those segments in regards to the statistics of activity, because they should treat those moments as small investigations. Most Haunted, as I said in my reviews, chose to keep that footage in, which means that they think it's significant, they think that the evidence there is significant, they think investigation methods there are significant. Therefore, I'm judging that as part of the investigation. Now, onto the statistics, because there is some interesting stuff. Well, first I'm going to discuss a little bit more the scientific method as to who hits what points. Like I say, in my written blog post, I do write in detail on this. So I write down exactly why they hit each point. I'm not going to list off stuff here because I'm not going to remember all the points. Some of it, it's like I've written here very iffy Yvette for some of the points because it was kind of a very thin line and I was very generous in that. So for certain people, I'm like, they probably don't really hit the points often, but they hit it at least once, that I could think of at least. So for observation, the people who hit that, the whole team hits it. So Yvette, Carl, Stuart, Glenn, Greg, all of them hit the observation. So that is when they're hearing noises and things, and they are saying, oh, what's that noise? All of them do that. All of them acknowledge it, which is fantastic. And it's what you'd expect as a bare minimum for paranormal investigators. You're not going to be a very good investigator for the paranormal if you go into a location and then you're hearing banging noises but you're not addressing it. So, 2, question. This is one of the ones where I put iffy Yvette. Carl, Stuart, Glenn and Greg, they all hit it again for questioning. So again, that's upon hearing those things. Do they then say, oh, is this paranormal? Is this something else? A lot of them hit it through replication. So through checking behind doors or going to slam doors to like themselves to see whether or not that was the noise they've heard. That I've classed as questioning. The reason why I put iffy Yvette for this one is because of the conversation she has with Glenn about the paranormal existing. So Glenn's, during the first video, has a bit where he says about how they experience various things, but they don't know for sure whether or not it's down to the paranormal. And Yvette says that she argues otherwise and that she does think it's paranormal. So with that, it kind of shows she doesn't want to question, and that she has kind of a fixed mindset of, no, this isn't other stuff, this is 100% paranormal. But the reason why I have included her and said she does question is because there are 2 points where she does replicate. One is when she's walking through a tunnel, she hears a whistle. She refers to it as a whine, but through listening back the sound, it sounds more like a whistle. And she doesn't tell Greg about it, because this is when she's with Greg in the cellars. And she's walking through, and then she hears the noise, she stops, and then she kind of goes backwards a bit before mentioning it, and then walks forwards again, and then she mentions it to Greg and says that she just heard a whine, and she kind of imitates it and things, and she even explained she wasn't sure if it was due to the acoustics of the tunnel as she was moving through it, which is why she did that, which is brilliant. That is a point where she's questioning. Also, when she's with Glenn in the witch's cottage, there's a point where they're kind of moving away from this kitchen area, and then she tells Glenn to stop and to go backwards a bit, and she goes backwards, and she doesn't explain why again, she just goes backwards with him, and then she's like, oh no, it could just be my eyes, but I thought I just saw a face in the fireplace reflecting off the camera or through the camera image that they're looking at, which again is questioning. She says she determines it probably is just her eyes, but you know, she's questioning it, and that's the main thing. So, research. Does the team do any research? Again, I put iffy Yvette because she does, obviously, in the first video, she's the one who narrates the history segment, where she talks about Oliver Cromwell, Winston Churchill, I think Queen Elizabeth II might have stayed there, and the Janet Preston, Robert Lister, people like that with connections to the building. She narrates that, so she clearly has a bit of knowledge on the location. And also she does every now and then discuss various like little hints of paranormal theory. So I think that counts as research, but it's a bit either way. I think the other people who do research, Glenn and Greg as well. Glenn research because he refers to again, this is me trying to go through all the points and trying to remember how I argued it in the written blog post. But Glenn hits research because I think the light box segment. So he refers to the camera as the light box at one point and explains that spirits won't know what a camera is because they're from years ago. So if there are any old spirits there, then they won't know it. So it's best he refers to it as a light box, as they'll just look at that and see it as a device that is glowing. Which is absolutely fine. I think that is him displaying knowledge of paranormal theory. Also, he mentions about how he kind of questions this a little bit as well while he's saying it, but he kind of asks spirits if they see the location. This is while he's in the witch's cottage. No, it's not. Or is it? It's in one of the cottages, either the farmhouse or witch's. I think it's the farmhouse. But when he's in the old farm cottage, he calls out and asks if the spirits see it as they saw it when they were alive, and if they view him as an intruder, which I think is really good, and good theory from him as well, to put that forward. So I think that's a bit of background paranormal research. I don't think that's particularly just off the top of his head. Might be. But again, I think that shows a little bit. Plus, he talks about Oliver Cromwell. This is a big point he hits. He even leads Yvette to a room where Oliver Cromwell used to stay. So he has the knowledge of where Oliver Cromwell stayed and the fact he stayed there. So Glenn absolutely hits the point of research. And Greg as well, I believe also hits the point of research because he knows about the caged area outside the psychiatric building. Which, again, you could just say he's just seen that. But yeah, he says that. And there was another point, but I can't remember what point I make in the written post on Glenn. But the people who don't do the research are Carl and Stuart. And there are reasons which I can't remember for that. One is Carl seems very, very surprised about the cells that are in the psychiatric building. On the Gisborne Estate website, where you can see the listing for that, it's how you go through booking that location, it clearly says cells. Well, no, it doesn't say cells, it says prison on there, with a picture of the cells as well. So I'm assuming it's Carl who booked it, but he doesn't seem to display knowledge of these cells, which is confusing. So that implies he doesn't do research. Also, he makes comments about flies and says that they feel sinister, but he doesn't know why, which again shows lack of knowledge in the paranormal, because flies have negative connotations anyway due to them being around things that are rotting and around dead bodies and all of that lot. But as a result, in the paranormal community, they are associated with the demonic and with anything along the lines of that, with the negative paranormal stuff. So for him to say, oh, it feels sinister, but I don't know why, I don't know how he doesn't know why, but a lack of research on his part regarding the paranormal. And then you've got Stuart, who asks Carl a couple of questions about locations. Stuart doesn't really bring up any thought on the paranormal regarding theories and things. He just says that they're never going to capture anything on camera, as does Carl, which I think as well is inaccurate. I think you can capture stuff on camera. But regarding Stuart and the research side, he asks Carl about what they know regarding the witch's cottage location. So Stuart straight away doesn't know. And also, he asks about the upper living quarters, like what that space was going to be used for, what it was used for. And again, by asking that, he doesn't know, which means that he has a lack of knowledge regarding the location. The other point on Greg as well, with him in research, was he knew about the hole in the step. Now, granted, Carl could have told him about the hole in the step, but it again shows that he does have prior knowledge to the location. Now, hypothesis. This is the big one. So this is the big one in the scientific method as to who ticks the box here. Only Glenn and Greg, only they tick the hypothesis box, and it is not great that only they do, because this is the big thing. So the reason why Glenn and Greg tick it and no one else does, it's a subtle thing. And again, it's probably me being a bit lenient, but I've been lenient to various team members. That's why I put Iffy Yvette as some notes. Glenn has a laptop, which he says is recording EVPs. He is the only team member to acknowledge this laptop exists. And he mentions it whenever he can. And unfortunately, we don't hear what the laptop's called. I'm assuming he didn't capture anything. But he has this laptop set out in a room kind of in the upper living quarters. And yeah, so that to me is Glenn having a hypothesis, because the hypothesis there would be, if I set up this laptop to record EVPs in the upper living quarters, in like room X of the upper living quarters, then it will capture a voice that is neither mine or any other team members or anyone who's in the building, which will be unexplainable. That kind of thing would be a hypothesis from him. But it's an act that he has done and set out to do pre-investigation, because he'd have had to have brought that laptop there and set it all up and known about the fact he was going to have that laptop there before the investigation. So that to me is him having a hypothesis. Now, as for Greg having a hypothesis, I would say yes, when he's replicating Carl, like the moment where Carl gets injured. Glenn and Greg are the only ones to try and test this and try and investigate it. No one else does. Carl avoids the area where he was injured, which is kind of understandable if it is legitimate. Stuart doesn't go there at all, and Yvette does go there, but kind of leads Glenn away from that area, which is why I've not included Glenn with saying that he does a good job of investigating what happened with Carl, whereas with Greg, he straight away is like, right, I'm going to go off and get damage like Carl did. And he goes straight there. You've got a wide angle shot, like full body shot of Greg standing in the exact spot Carl was standing in when he was injured, apparently by a spirit. And then he's calling out anything and everything he can to be like, right, come on, kick me, hit me, do whatever, that kind of thing. Which is, for me, him having a hypothesis. He's like, if I go to the same spot Carl was injured and call out for spirits to do that to me, they'll do that to me. Which is, I think, an accurate hypothesis. And not an accurate, but, it's a hypothesis. And I think it is proven that, the hypothesis isn't proven. So it raises questions then as to the Carl thing, as what Glenn does then say later on, because he says, are you waiting for Carl to come back? Will you hurt Carl again if he's here? Is it something about Carl you don't like? He says stuff like that, which I think is extremely valid point to put him down as having a hypothesis, and he's really the only team member that does. But I have put down Glenn as well for the laptop thing. Then experimenting, all of them do this. It's hard not to experiment when you're in a paranormal investigation. So points for experimentation for the team, it's anything regarding replication or, looking behind doors, in a way calling out can be classed as experimenting. anything at all to try and gather evidence, which they all do. Although I put Yvette as being quite iffy, because I can't remember the angle particularly that I went for with the blog post, but they all do it. Then analysis. So do they analyse the data that they gather from that experiment? Yeah, iffy again for Yvette. So anything to do with the analysis is looking back at footage or recognising in the moment the data you're collecting or have collected, and you kind of make assumptions from that. Which is why point 6 and 7, analysis and conclusions, they're kind of the same. It just depends, because analysis can sometimes involve a variety of steps, whereas conclusion is, right, looking at this data, I conclude that this. So with Yvette, she does the voiceovers for any audio that they capture. So to me, that is Yvette analysing that audio. And that is her saying, right, here we hear a voice of a girl or a laugh or something like that. So I'll put her down as analysing. Stuart as well. At one point says to Carl, is this a child then? Because of the nature of the noises that they're hearing, and that it seems to be kind of messing with them a bit. So that's him analysing that. Glenn as well does the same kind of thing with saying how quiet it is. And there is another point I'm sure I made in the written one, but I can't remember it. But either way, with him saying about how quiet it is, that in a way is him analysing the lack of data he's getting. And then Greg as well makes comments about, oh, are you a child? Because of hearing tapping either side of the corridor. And he also determines where the kind of focal point in a way is. The only one I've said who doesn't analyse really is Carl. He does make a comment about the cells being a hotspot, but that's after Yvette already kind of makes that point. But otherwise, there's no... I can't think of any times in the investigation where he kind of analyses the data, and saying that he doesn't draw conclusions either, aside from this place is negative. But he doesn't really back that up. Like, if he said, I have been injured, therefore the spirit is negative, then yeah, that would work, but he doesn't do that. Instead, he hears a door slam and he's like, right, this place is horrible, it's really negative, I don't like it here at all. And I'm just like, that's not good analysis. Because just because the door is slammed doesn't mean it's a negative spirit. It just means that it slammed the door. That's all it means. So yeah, so Carl doesn't do that. Everyone else draws conclusions as well, for those reasons mentioned with the analysing. So, a very, very interesting statistic, because this is where we've got some really good statistics, which doesn't look good for certain team members. Because already you've got the statistics of how scientific they all are. So Greg and Glenn both hit 7 out of 7 points. They're the most scientific team members, which is brilliant. Yvette hit, I think, about 5. Let me just do a quick tally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She hit 6 out of 7 points. So she's pretty good. Like, she's pretty much there with scientific stuff. She just doesn't do a hypothesis. And then you've got, I think it was Stuart next on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 out of 7. Again, it's all right, but starting to slip. And then you've got Carl on, I think it was 3 out of 7. On 3 out of 7. Which really is not good for the scientific method, especially as he's the producer of the programme. I would expect for him to kind of lead an example, but he doesn't. But interesting statistic time in regards to how much activity everyone gets. So I've gone through and I did bullet point the activity everyone gets in each part of their videos, kind of thing. And I did an average of how much activity everyone gets kind of per location in a way, or per video in a way. It's that kind of thing. I think it's per location that I did it. So Carl, he got 55 pieces of activity happen. Like, he experienced 55 things, which is a lot of things. I'll actually read it out in regards to highest to lowest. So you've got Carl on 55, Stuart on 52, Yvette on 43, Greg on 37, and Glenn on 27. Now, bearing in mind Glenn's the skeptic, that's very interesting. That fact that he's experienced the least. So straight away, I'm like, that's an interesting statistic. But then if you look at the averages of how much activity they're experiencing, kind of per location they investigate, Stuart is at the top of the list with 8.7 bits of activity. Then it's Carl on 7.9, Yvette on 7.2, Greg on 6.2, and Glenn on 4.5. So rounding that up and down and things, you've got Stuart on 9, Carl on 8, Yvette on 7, Greg on 6, and Glenn on 5. Which, again, very interesting. The fact that Stuart and Carl are the least scientific with their methods, because remember, Carl only scored like 3 out of 7 points. Yet Carl is there as the second highest, most activity experienced. And again, Stuart was down there as well with the scientific methods. And yeah, they both are. Carl and Stuart at the top of the most activity featured list. So they're the least scientific, but they experience the most activity. And again, this is just like bangs, knocks, taps, and stuff that we can hear, as well as stuff where they're saying, "Oh, I've seen a light" or something like that. So any point where you can look through and be like, they've experienced something there, or I've heard something in my headphones. That's the points I've listed. And then you've got the actual locations, and this is where it gets extremely interesting. Because then you start wondering, oh, maybe it's just the locations, right? Maybe it's the locations they're investigating. Maybe they're just in extremely active locations, and Carl and Stuart are investigating the locations which are more active. Because you'd expect that. I don't believe in the whole spirits waking up thing. I do believe that they have energy and they use up energy and they need to regain energy over time. So you've got that factor into it, which could explain certain things. But yeah, so you've got the old farm cottage. 19 bits of activity occur there in total. The witch's cottage, 18 bits in total. Psychiatric building, 29 in total. Upper living quarters, 12. And then hospital wing, 18. So the averages for this, and this is the interesting thing as to how much activity each investigator is getting there. So farm cottage goes from 19 to 4.75, witch's cottage goes from 18 to 6, psychiatric building goes from 29 to 7.25, upper living quarters goes from 12 to 6, and hospital wing goes from 18 to 6. So on average, really, you're getting around 5 or 6 bits of activity per place. Because, cottage is on 4.75, so that's basically on 5, which is cottage 6, psychiatric building basically 7, upper living quarters 6, hospital wing 6, so it's 5, 6, 7, 6, 6. So, it's not a great deal. All investigators pretty much score below that, except from Carl and Stuart. Because if you look at it, Old Farm Cottage, average is... We'll be generous. We'll round up to 5, right? Actually, no, we won't be generous. We're going to keep it on 4.75. Just for the sake of argument. 4.75 for that. Glenn has 1 bit of activity there, so he's vastly under. Greg has 3, so he's about right. Carl has 4, so he's pretty much spot on. He's just about under. Stuart's got 11 there. How can you have 11 bits of activity in a place where the average is only, let's be generous and say 5? He gets more than twice the amount of activity which you'd expect in that location. And that is down to when he's by himself there. And it's like, you could argue he's the first one there by himself, but we don't know the order that it's all filmed. He might have started there, he might have finished there, we don't know. And you gotta wonder where everyone is at the time that everyone films their sections when they're off by themselves. So that was a very interesting statistic on Stuart having 11 in comparison to the average of 5. Then you've got Witch's Cottage, where the average is 6. When you've got Carl, Greg, Yvette, Glenn, all there together, I've put that down as 3. It's quite tough to judge it there because it's quite consistent knocking that you can hear through that segment. So I've done 3 different things. I think one is when it did the heartbeat, one is just the knocking in general, another one is when it's copying the footsteps, because they're different enough to determine them as separate events. So they all experience 3. So that's when they're a big team. Glenn and Greg are there as well. Yvette and Glenn So again, remember the average is 6, they get 5. So they're about right, a little bit under. Carl and Stuart go there, they get 10 bits of activity when the average is 6. That's quite a bit over. Again, I don't know if it's because of Stuart or if it's because of Carl, but this is a bit of a trend. Then you move into the psychiatric building, and I will acknowledge here I've combined Stuart's scores because he is there twice. He's there during the general shot section and during the investigation section. So I've combined his numbers into one number, which it's an average. It's based on averages, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so the average here, 7.25. Greg is on 7, so he's spot on for it, for what you'd expect in that location. Carl and Yvette are on 10, so they're already a bit higher. And then Stuart's on 12. The two that are combined are 7 and 5. So the 7, pretty spot on. Well, he is spot on. 5 is a little bit under, but combined for him to have 12 in total across these 5 videos is very high. Much higher than you'd expect. But then you could argue you'd expect 7 and 7, so you would expect it to be 14 because he's there twice. But given that these are our averages that I'm kind of working off, it's not great for that. So upper living quarters, again, average is 6. Glenn has 3 bits of activity there, which is very low. Carl and Stuart have 9, which again is much higher. And I don't know why they're always scoring higher. Then hospital wing average is 6. Greg gets 4, which is under. Glenn and Yvette get 5, which is about right. Carl gets 9, which again you wouldn't expect this at all. And it begs the question of why is it that their results, like why is it that the activity they're getting is so skewed and so high up? So you then, it basically starts building a bit of a case where you look at the numbers and you're like, not only are Carl and Stuart 4th and 5th place in terms of the scientific method and how many points they're hitting, but they're also the highest in regards to the activity they're experiencing, and they're the highest per location for how much activity they're experiencing. It's not even like there's a fluke, oh, Greg's got the highest in this place. They're there at the top in every single one. And so that leads on to, are they legitimate? Are Most Haunted a legitimate paranormal investigation team? Because we've discussed the numbers, and this is what I want to try and keep this focused on, kind of the statistics behind it and the numbers, because you can't really be subjective about, or objective. You can't really put your opinion into numbers and things. The numbers are there. As I put out a post the other day, numbers don't lie, apparently. Now, there are obviously leeways with this, which I explain in the written post. I've watched these videos and I've gone, right, this is a bit of experience, this is an experience, and I've made those notes based on my own subjective viewing of what is an experience for someone, like what is a piece of activity. So if someone else was to watch that, they might include some of the points that I've included, they might not include some of the points I've included. Regarding what I think is and isn't activity for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's legitimate activity, I just think it's activity. So someone else could probably put these numbers through and get very different things. However, I am confident through how skewed they are for Carl and Stuart, I'm confident in saying that if someone else was to do that kind of thing and to try and replicate this post, they'd probably get very similar results. Maybe not in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the order that they'd have for the teams. And I'm open to listening to any arguments that people might have regarding how scientific everyone is, and if they do meet certain points that I've said they don't meet, and stuff like that. So, are they legitimate? Are they scientific? Based on these points that I've raised? I would say, unfortunately, as a whole, no. I mean, the Most Haunted team, in regards to the scientific method, do score a grand total average of 6 out of 7 for how many points on average the team are hitting. So that's good. That means that the team is mostly scientific and mostly conducting the scientific method. It's just the hypothesis thing, I think, which is letting them down. So it means that they're doing everything except from creating a hypothesis. But regarding the activity, that's where it gets a bit iffy for me. And if you look at how many of the team have hit all those marks for the scientific method, it's 2 out of 5. And regarding the activity, you've got Carl and Stuart with such inflated numbers of how much activity they experience per investigation. You don't have the team questioning, right, why are they getting the numbers? Why are they paranormal magnets, basically? You don't have the team asking that. I mean, you do, in a way, have Greg asking it by saying, oh, I want to see if I can get injured like Carl did, but it is a reaction to an event. It's not the whole thing of, oh yeah, they have vastly inflated numbers. So that then leads to the questions of, because a lot of the phenomena they experience is auditory, Carl and Stuart are the only team members throughout the investigations to push forward this idea of we'll never capture it on camera, we'll always only ever hear it. So why is that? I mean, you also have a point where Yvette is saying about, oh, it sounds like the knocking's coming from right in front of you, Carl, or either side of you, Carl, even for that one. And Stuart's, when Carl and Stuart together, and Carl says, Stuart, it sounds like it's coming from right in front of you, and Stuart shines a torch right in front of Carl. And you have, again, this is a thing that I've learned about fairly recently called the hammer toe technique, which is if you wear, it works best with steel toe cap shoes, big boots with a lot of kind of room around your foot to cause a good bit of echo. But if you scrunch up your toes and then move them in a way so you're kind of slamming down that middle joint against the bottom of your shoe, you can create a tapping sound. And it's a very subtle technique, which, I have Beardo, who is part of the YouTube channel Beardo Gets Scared. I have him to thank for knowing this because he did a video about it. But if you do this technique, you can create that tapping sound. It's very subtle as well because you're wearing big boots for it. So that's the only giveaway, really, if you're doing that, if you're getting tapping and you're wearing these big boots. But yeah, aside from that, it's just subtle little movements with your foot. Because you're just scrunching up your toes. So if you can kind of keep the back of your foot still while you're doing it, you can get quite a tap going. And it raises questions of their experience in auditory phenomena. So that already raises the question of, are they overlays? But you've got all the tapping and things that they get, and it all seems to revolve around Carl. You can see through the statistics, when Carl is with Yvette, the numbers increase for Yvette. When Yvette is with Carl, I'm going to see if I can see the numbers, because I'm pretty sure that it's accurate, what I'm saying now. And I want to try and back this up with the statistics. So, when Yvette and Glenn are together, in the witch's cottage, they get 5 things. When Carl and Yvette are together, they get 10 things. When Yvette and Glenn are together again, they get 5 things. This is where I'm just like, have I messed up on the post? Because I always mix up Glenn and Greg's names. Yeah. Oh no, I've not. No, yeah, that's good. I got confused for a moment. Where's... because that was the sellers. Yeah, I got so confused because I was looking at it and I was like, hang on a minute. Yvette's investigated with Greg at one point. And I was looking at it and being like, I can't see any points where she's investigated with Greg. And that's because they were in the cells and I've not made notes on that. So yeah, so that confused me. But she has investigated with Glenn twice. So we'll compare it to Glenn. Yvette and Glenn together, 5 on both of their investigations together. But then when she's with Carl, it goes up to 10. It makes no sense. It really makes no sense. Unless there are shenanigans at play. Really, that's the only thing that makes sense with it. How can an investigator go from having 5 on average across 2 locations to suddenly going to one location with someone else and it jump up to 10? And that's during a location. I mean, the average is 7.25 there, so rounding it down to 7. they still get 3 bits of evidence more, like 3 things that happen more than what you'd expect there. So I think that's significant. So I think, looking at all these statistics, regarding the hammer toe technique, it seems to all around Carl. Wherever Carl is, this tapping goes. And now you could point to Greg's sections and say, but he was hearing tapping. Stuart was hearing tapping. Things like that. But I'm going to put that down to we don't know where everyone is at any given point. Greg actively, like, he is silent, picks up the camera, runs. And it seems like he's trying to catch someone out. It's like he knows someone's there. And so he's picked up and gone. Could be paranormal, but I doubt it because of these inflated numbers from Carl and Stuart. It seems like they're trying to boost the activity that you get in an episode. That's what it comes across as. So regarding Carl and Stuart, I think that they probably are faking things, or at least because then you start asking, are members aware of faking things if that is happening? I don't know if Yvette is, because a lot around her is the tapping phenomena. But with Glenn and Greg, Glenn at one point is, he smells cigars and he says that Carl is partial to them. He didn't have to mention that detail, but he does. Update come up. But yeah, so you then have Glenn saying about the I've lost my train of thought then. Yeah, so he said about the cigars, and then he says about how quiet it is, and that Yvette would love it because of how quiet it is and things. And he makes a big deal about how quiet it is for him. And even when him and Yvette are together and things, he's going on about how quiet it is. So I think that he's kind of poking a bit of a jab there. And even when Carl's injured, he says he needs that to happen to him. And I think that's again a bit of a jab saying, well, you're really injured though. And even Greg questions it and says, "Oh, you sure it wasn't just your back having a twinge?" And he's like, "No." And I was like, "No." And then straight away he goes to investigate it with Greg. And so I think that they're aware that there's potential stuff happening around Carl. And it seems like there is. I think that Stuart's in on it as well because it all happens while they're both together all the time. And the way that they film things, straight away, camera up at the ceiling, not showing at all where people could be sneaking around, not properly checking behind doors, not going into rooms. At one point, Stuart was filming Carl going in and out of rooms, and I was like, "No, Stuart, you're the one with the camera. You should be doing that. You should be showing us there's no one in those rooms." But they don't, and that's after the ladder. I think after the ladder fell. In the witch's cottage, either after the ladder fell or after doors did slam. Probably both. So yeah, it wasn't great. So I have a lot of criticisms with how they investigate. I have a lot of with how Carl and Stuart investigate anyway, and I have a lot of concern over how much activity they get in comparison to the average per location and how much other people are getting. They're getting way more, and I don't know why, unless you start asking questions about them potentially faking things. So, in my opinion, are Most Wanted a legitimate paranormal investigation team, like what their opening says? I'd like to say yes, but they're not. Greg and Glenn, brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. It's like with filming techniques, Greg putting down his camera and having full body shot and being silent when he's picking up the camera again to chase after noises, and he properly runs as well. Brilliant investigating from him. Glenn being level-headed. At one point he's saying he can hear a dripping sound. Well, he can hear a tapping, but he's putting that down to water getting in because it's raining outside and he's aware that place is falling down. So I think that they're the best investigators, and I think that their 7 out of 7 scores reflect that very well. Sadly, the other team don't get 7 out of 7, and that means that only 2 out of 5 investigators completely follow the scientific method investigation, and therefore they're not a scientific team. And due to the issues or questions raised by Carl and Stewart's inflated activity numbers, you can't say with confidence that they're a legitimate paranormal investigation team. You just can't. Due to how they film and the statistics I've discussed, no one could say that. You can say Glenn and Greg are brilliant and that they bring it up, but as for everyone else, you've got a question mark over it, as did Carl and Stewart, which isn't ideal. So that's my thoughts on all of that. Again, thank you to Beardo for Beardo Gets Scared. I've discovered his channel, I think it was end of last year, start of this year, that kind of thing. I will be doing a post about him hopefully next week. The plan is for that to be Friday. And so we'll also do a video discussion about him. But yeah, so I'll save all that for then. But yeah, it was due to his videos that I found out about the hammer toe technique, and I mean, he found out about it because of someone else's videos. I unfortunately do not know who they are, but please go and look at Beardo's YouTube channel for more information on all of that. Yeah, his channel's Beardo Gets Scared on YouTube. He does gaming and things as well. It's pretty cool. But yeah, so thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I hope that you found it interesting. I know it's been a bit rambly at times, a bit waffly. It's not quite as in-depth as what the written post was. And I know there were times where I kind of blanked on what I was saying a few times. But yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed it anyway and enjoyed hearing me ramble on. And let me know as well, do you agree with what I've been saying with the Most Haunted team? I know they've got a fair few fans. I really liked them when I was younger. I think that as people, they seem like nice people. But in terms of the investigating, you need to question it. And I think as a result, they shouldn't have that slide at the start of their videos. I don't think that they should, because I don't think that they're a legitimate investigation team. If they didn't have that at the start, I probably wouldn't be doing this video now. So it just provokes questions. It provokes further questions when stuff does happen where you're like, that's a bit iffy. Because if they didn't have it, you could be like, oh, entertainment. Whereas, because they do have it, and they're like, oh, we're legitimate. You're like, are you though? So, yeah, I hope that you enjoyed it. Please let me know your thoughts on the Most Haunted team as well. And if you've disagreed with me as well, especially let me know that. But if you do disagree, don't just say, I disagree. Make sure you back it up and things. Kind of like what I've tried to do here with numbers. Because I figured that was probably the best way to go about it, to do numbers rather than pointing out specific, this noise happens, I think it is this. Because there's no way really showing that. But if you go from a number angle of, oh, these have inflated numbers of how much activity they're experiencing, it's better to go down that route, I think. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching. It's probably been a while. Yes, it has been... Okay, no, it's actually not been that long. It's been an hour. But yeah, so I'll upload this to YouTube as well. So if you're watching it on YouTube, again, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on Most Haunted. So thank you very much, and goodbye. Now that's where I need to try and press the finish button.